Welcome to a special virtual edition of the Skeptics track at Dragoncon. And now, your host, Angie Mackey.
Hello, welcome to our live stream Skeptic track for Dragoncon 2020. Thank you so much for joining us. Boy, 2020 sure seems like it's a bingo card full of craziness, right? We've got murder hornets, guys on jetpacks, we got the Arctic ice shelf collapsing, COVID-19. Nick Eftimiades is joining us today to give us some insight into this, what looks like complete chaos. Can you help us out there, Nick?
I can try. Thanks, Angie.
Sure.
So I thought it was kind of funny that this year is in China. This is called Year of the Rat in the Chinese astrological calendar, and so it figures it should start out with a plague. So a plague is the first thing we see in 2020, and it really hasn't gotten any better since then. And there is a large amount of what I think people will call chaos in the world today. And people are looking for answers. People are looking for causes. And it's actually a fairly complex situation. It's not as easy as blaming this administration or China or any other specific entity. There's a whole lot of backstory to this. And what I would propose today is we take a look through some of that backstory and understand why the world is being shaped as it is and how it appears to us. And maybe we can explain some things like dissension in the United States and global power competition, or GPC, great power competition, as it's being called now. So with that, I'd like to look at this in two basic categories. Okay, one category is trends that are affecting us and our environment, and the other category is disruptive technologies that are affecting us. And we can look in history and actually see disruptive technologies that have changed civilization. Perhaps the greatest were in the 1800s. When we started to get plumbing and gas lighting and things like that, which actually changed disease rates and dropped them down dramatically and changed societies all over the world. That industrial revolution that followed that were some of the extraordinary, and they were basically based on technologies. So we see a phenomenal amount of technologies introduced in the 1800s, ranging from running water to actually the first solar cell was developed in the mid 1800s. So a lot of changes that have been driven in civilization have been caused by technologies and trends in society. So let's look at some of them now that we are having. And I'll sort of list them first and then go in and explain them a little more in depth. I would say top on our list is individual empowerment. People who are, all of us in society who are individually empowered. Individuals now have greater power than they've ever had in civilization. And we'll go into it a little more in depth. Diffusion of power, shifting from governments to individuals, groups, businesses, etc., globally. Changing global demographics, which always impacts societies. Climate change and natural resource depletion, two other things that we can see now are exacerbating problems around the world. Fake news, privacy and influence, employment trends, transnational criminal organizations, all those, the growth in transnational organized crime, I should say. The growth in all those areas are impacting our day-to-day lives. And typically people don't stop to think about them, right? Don't stop to understand them. We also have a whole category of potentially disruptive technologies that we'll talk about. And that includes additive manufacturing, the Internet of Things, hugely disruptive, as well as global telecommunications, obviously. Robots and drones, very disruptive as to this point, and is going to be only more so in the future. Artificial intelligence, biometrics, big data integration, nano and biotechnologies, are hugely disruptive factors in society, and it is just starting. That's sort of the key point that you should take away from this, that all those disruptive technologies, and just, good or bad, but it is just starting. So it's going to get far worse. So let's take a look at some of the specifics. Individual empowerment is a cause and an effect of most other trends, including the global expanding economy, the rapid growth of the middle class all over the world, which is, in the next 20 or 30 years, we'll have the lowest percentage of desperately poor than civilization has ever had. And that's because of the rapid growth of the middle class, actually throughout Asia as a primary, and other areas secondarily, in Middle East and Africa. And a lot of these, when you think about it, is greater educational attainment, better health care, all made possible through telecommunications capabilities. With the growth of the middle class, and I'll draw an example for you, why these things become disrupted. With that growth of the middle class, just due to telecommunications and individual empowerment, they exercise individual empowerment. And if you look at China, they exercise individual empowerment in China. Large middle class, people can afford to eat. They can afford to eat a lot more. They can afford to eat a lot better. Okay? China has said, correctly so, they've lifted almost 500 million people out of poverty. And that has helped raise the entire region. Unfortunately, it's also driven China to claim the entire South China Sea, because they've got to feed that population. And there's only two great things the South China Sea offers. One is energy, gas and oil fields. And we should note that China's energy needs in its developing economy are such that if it built a nuclear power plant every week for 20 years, it still wouldn't meet the growing power needs that China has. So having unfettered access to oil and gas is critical for China, as is having access to the seafood stocks. Very, very big. In fact, right now, Asia consumes 70% of the world's seafood. So now what do you have to do when you have hundreds of millions of people coming out of poverty into a middle class? Of course, you're going to have people having a lot more, and you're going to have to feed them. So we see as a basic result of raising an economy, raising 500 million people out of poverty, making those people empowered as individuals to having direct ramifications on right now the conflict and the daring games that are going back and forth, if you will, in the South China Sea. China's aggressive posture, the United States response, Taiwan's response, other nations responding. This is all you could draw a line through these incidents to understand why it's occurring. Right? Really is about feeding China, right, empowering China.
Well, you have to feed them food and energy, right? So
right.
I know the Chinese have been investing heavily in Africa. Have you seen implications for expanding into developing economies in Africa as well?
So it's a real unique situation in Africa. China was looking at almost 1 million people being unemployed in the construction industry after its big boom. Right? Mm-hmm. Didn't want 1 million unemployed people. So it loaned money to African governments, shipped its population, hundreds of thousands of them, over 500,000, overseas, so that they could be employed, and the African governments are basically taking on the burden of doing that. So it was an absolutely brilliant capitalist move by the communist country of China. Sorry,
No, I chuckled because you're absolutely right. I mean, and it was a boon of economy for the African countries that need that sort of influx of capital. Even though they seem to have labor, they did need the capital, though. Do you think that had anything to do with the conflicts that we were seeing over there?
Yes, most certainly. The populations after a bit of time, and this has even been seen in Pakistan, but the population started to complain that, hey, wait a minute, I mean, there's been an increase in employment, no doubt. They've had to, the local population has realized some increase in employment, but sort of not what they were promised. They primarily got Chinese laborers doing it and engineers, and so there's been a bit of dissension, which unfortunately has led to close cooperation between the security components of China and a lot of these governments to quell that response from the population. So, it's a balance. It's going to be a balance of what China's needs are, which they've certainly taken care of, and then what the local government needs are, all the while trying not to fall into a debt trap.
So one of the things you mentioned was the the diffusion of power amongst the individual. Are we seeing that in these sorts of economies as well?
Yeah, actually, just good you mentioned it. Just because you see these issues coming to the rise, and these issues coming out publicly, and sometimes, like the Nigerian government and others, have said no to China because they're getting response from local population. The fact that the United States takes it as an issue, the fact that the European Union takes it as an issue, are all a result of information being available to support individual empowerment, right? So it's not just the local government in one of 13 African countries, actually, that really have close relationships with China under the Belt and Road Initiative, but it's the European Union, it's labor unions, it's academic institutions, it's think tanks, it's other governments, and the reason that all these players are able to act is because they have information. Now, this is despite the fact that, as you know, China's sort of the most aggressive digital authoritarian state in the world, so they try and clamp down as much as possible on releasing information. So, but it still allows, in this diffusion of power, allows others to have access and others to respond accordingly. And that's a good point. It takes us into the diffusion of power. So what you find with global communications, and everyone knows this because you've all been on social media and you've all seen, I don't know, pick William Shatner. It doesn't matter who you pick. Pick actors. That's my favorite. But pick an actor or a singer or someone that's famous, and you have millions of people following that person. So that power to control information, to dole out information to society, which basically is a control of society, has now been taken, not even given, but taken by individuals. You have individuals you have newspapers, which we'll discuss a little more. That great era of mass media is gone, and you have diffusion all over to hundreds or thousands. I mean, I read Al Jazeera every day, right? Couldn't have done that 40 years ago. So this diffusion of power brings together people, particularly in a democratic or liberal democracies, brings together people for periods of time. I agree with you on that issue. Animal rights, pick an issue. The environment. Multiple organizations and individuals come together to support each other and to raise awareness on a specific issue. We see that now with Black Lives Matter, right? Tons of organizations have piled in, to support the idea of Black Lives Matter, right? And then after that, after X has been achieved, then they all start to diffuse out towards their own interest. So this is, while we've had this type of thing before, labor unions and all that sort of thing forever, we've never had it with the type of immediate impact that we see with global telecommunications and individuals all having a diffusion of power.
Doesn't that create the risk for creating bubbles, like where you just have sort of an echo chamber where nonsense ideas can really get amplified above and beyond the sort of attention that they need to get?
Yeah, well, it absolutely does, and it becomes quite literally explosive. And I say that's part of this whole idea of chaos that we have, that you have, bubble chambers that come together, for some period of time, things get whipped up, by supporting organizations, and probably take a far greater, have a far greater impact than really the issue needs. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, but there's no arguing with that often, because it is a self-contained bubble. So we lose reasoning, we lose discussion, we lose give and take in those types of environments, and it does become an extraordinarily powerful force in society.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that it's probably a net positive. Do you agree?
I don't know. It's certainly, human beings don't like chaos. As really, it's just not natural for the human condition to be constantly changing. It's why you take the same road to work every day, typically, right? Because they like stability, they like this and that. Yeah. So I don't think, I think it sets an undertone for humanity that's very stressful. I mean, on a personal level.
Yeah. So do you think that they're just going to offload the thinking process and allow others who have more committed sort of mentality or commitment to any particular cause to sort of take over the thinking? I mean, like I just was thinking about your point about the fake news and wondering if the two are intricately connected.
Oh yeah, frighteningly so. Mm-hmm. And I worry more about because I don't think that there's often a reasoning element or a critical thinking component of it, and I think that goes back, and we've had this discussion in Skeptics so many times. Mm-hmm. That goes back to the population that we're raising. The population that we're raising is not within these groups stopping and saying, okay, wait a minute, let's look at all the details, let's look at all the sides and understand what the best course forward is that we can have. It's not. It reminds me of in some, and remember, this is just in extreme cases, right? Coalitions to support climate change and things are often more reasonable and working together to accomplish goals, right? So, but in the extreme cases, you do find sort of an unguided missile.
Well, how do you recommend that we try to help promote the best outcome? What can we do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's like watching a tidal wave. It's like watching a tidal wave come at you, saying, how can I focus all this energy in the best way possible? And I think publishing is, to me, a biggie, because if you have respected works in publishing, it leaves hundreds of journalists and others to be able to quote those works, and starts a massive response that says, hey, no, wait a minute, there are other voices here, and they're based on logic and statistics and and actual data. So that is one means of doing it. But a lot of this process is perverted, and as there are a lot of lies or little segments of works that people like to quote, to move a justification forward. So I don't see any easy answers. It's ultimately going to come in elementary school, when you start raising kids that question everything and say, wait a minute, let's take a look at this and see A, B, C, D, and lay it all out.
Well, you talked about the disruptive technology in the past. Can you talk about the disruptive technology of today?
Sure. So some of the really interesting disruptive technologies that are going to evolve over the next decade, and let's start with additive manufacturing, is what we call 3D printing. So if you so these disruptions are great. I mean, one of the if you were in a small town or a village in Africa or something like that, or a small place in the hills in Latin America or the United States,
or on the space shuttle or on the space station, for example.
Yeah. Any place isolated. I mean, if you take one generation or two generations of additive manufacturing into the future, what does it benefit to that town or something not to have to, go out and buy a rake, and travel 100 miles to do so, or to create a part to fix a car or an appliance in your home. This type of technology, as it spreads and as it becomes better, And, the state of nanotechnology, nano manufacturing is sort of moving up on the heels of that. But think of the extraordinary change it's going to be globally when people don't have to travel and don't have to order and don't have to ship. It's a very positive change. The negative, almost nightmarish side of that is that if you could print anything you want, and whether it be a pair of glasses or a pen or anything like that, why would you bother buying anything or importing anything? What happens state to state commerce when you can basically print everything you want domestically? You buy car parts out of China? No, you don't. Not if you can print them locally, or if your local manufacturer can print them. So as that technology increases, I bought a 3D printer for $1,000, but and remember when computers first came out, right? How costly they were, and look how they are now. So imagine the same type of progression 10 to 20 years from now. Mm-hmm. So it not only is going to change the lives of people in isolated areas for our general lives, but global commerce as well. And I have no idea how that's going to wind up. That could be a huge issue.
Well, when we were running out of PPE, I know many friends of mine were printing the face plates for medical folks so that we didn't run out. I mean, there are lots of places. I'm still taking my own wipes into work, so because we just don't have any in the hospital. So so there definitely are implications now, even right. and even including the ones that you just mentioned. That's fascinating. So so tell us more about the telecom. Are you talking about like more the infrastructure or the technology or both?
Let's talk about the both. Let's talk about the infrastructure and technology, and particularly how it gets to the Internet of Things. If you recall what advances that we made, now we're at 4G, where we're looking at 5G, which is hundreds of times faster than 4G. I mean, 6G will be down the road after that. That type of increase in data movement has all sorts of profound implications for everything from education to entertainment. The world is not going to be the same, and it's not. It'll be here this year, next year, but not really. 5 years or so, 5 years plus, it'll really be here, and we'll start seeing the implications of it, and how 3D visualizations and things will become commonplace, and the types of apps then that will be developed, and the type of engineering that will be done when you have that type of capability, hundreds of times faster than what we have now. And if you follow those lines out, well, that has implications for where people live. The one thing that has come out of COVID-19, many things have, but there's certainly been a change in how people are working. And if this expands as expected, when you changing demographics says we're going to have 60% of the population, living along the coasts globally within the next 20 years or so, I would say the opposite is going to happen. Because people are, as now in the United States, move to secondary cities where things are cheaper, and when they can work online, which will be made 100% easier with 5G, it's profound implications for the demographics, for where people are going to live, for those local economies, for globally. The running joke is that when you pick up for IT help and support, you get someone in India, and it's actually fairly true. A lot of people are employed in India, in Mumbai for that reason. But think of the global implications then when you can do that on a worldwide scale with absolutely instant contact which isn't questionable, and you can move massive amounts of data. So that's going to be extraordinary. The other part that links in is that in the Internet of Things, which over the next few years is expected to have billions of appliances on it, and the Internet of Things has actuators, right? Things that sensors and things that actually do something at the end of the Internet chain. So will you be able to globally pull your car and have it come around and pick you up? Well, we already have that with Teslas. I mean, I have a friend. I have a video where he called his car and it got out of a parking spot, drove down the street, and picked him up.
We'll all have
So
Batmobiles. That's amazing.
yeah, so that drones that fly everywhere and drop things off at your front house and things. So the change in technology the change in society will be pretty dramatic. Some people will have that, some will not. Okay, we have a developing world that is not going to have as much benefit. We'll certainly have some, but not as much benefit as you'll see in highly industrialized societies. So the question is also, what does that mean for the population? It's again a point of stress and chaos, and people don't adapt well for those types of changes when they see empty cars driving down the block to pick you up.
Well, I'm already seeing a lot of the translocation of services. So I work nights, and when we're sending out radiology studies to be read, those are large packets of data, and I'll get phone calls from radiologists from all over the world.
Yeah.
In fact, I get a kick out of asking where they are. And I had one that called me from Zurich, and I said, "Why do you sound like you're from Canada or from Vancouver?" And he said, "Because I'm from Vancouver." He just happened to live in Zurich, and was able to call me with the radiology report. And so we are already seeing some of those things. Now, radiology is a particular specialty that lends itself to that. But now that telemedicine is such a huge impact in
Right.
getting folks like psychiatrists and neurologists and other specialties that don't have the distribution that some of the other specialties do, it's already making things much more accessible to rural communities.
Right, and that has a huge impact on people's lives, on their health, on their growth. And telemedicine is going to be one of the huge dynamic positive changes that we're going to see globally over the next couple of decades. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot more that comes with it. And that's before you start adding things like artificial intelligence and biometrics and the nanotechnologies and nanobot sensors and integration of electronics and wireless technology with human beings. All sorts of things that are coming down the road as technologies go, that are really going to impact civilization as a whole. The question, the difference, I think, that we see in this part of history is that those changes are coming so quickly. Les Aspin, the former Secretary of Defense, I was listening to him once, and he said, and he's a PhD astrophysicist, right? Oxford. A smart guy.
Smarty pants, yep.
Yeah. And he said, when I first got into this business, the most advanced technology in the world was developed in the United States. And out of that, the really super cool stuff, advanced stuff, was developed in the Defense Department. And now that's CCD, camera, charge a couple devices and all those sorts of things. And he says, and now it's commercial and it's global. Huge adjustments, not just for us, but for nations all over the world. Because now on the positive side, you have what tremendous contributions you have to societies. And you have growing, moving, fluctuating money centers, right? People create something, they create a technology, and 20 days later, they're millionaires. Get a couple of issues of Entrepreneur magazine, you'll see what I mean. It's just extraordinary what the kids in their 20s are doing. And overnight billion.
Depressing. I think it'd be far too depressing. With this global flattening, do you see a greater or a smaller impact of the criminal organizations that you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, and moving towards that, transnational criminal organizations. Actually, I teach a course on that. And what you find as you start looking at it is that their growth has been extraordinary. They challenge, which is a really scary part, they challenge a lot of weak nation states. So, with the reason that TCOs are so feared is because with them they carry public corruption. And public corruption is never good for a society and degrades it considerably. actually, and it leads to restive populations and revolutions and things and mass migrations, all things like that tend to be results of transnational criminal organizations. Even in the United States, interesting. I spoke to some FBI folks, and they said that after you get past national security and terrorism, corruption on public officials is the next highest investigative crime for the FBI. It's number 3 or 4, which is, I actually wouldn't have thought that until I was told that. So when you look at foreign nation states who don't have the wealth of the United States, they're very, very subject to corruption, and that becomes problematic for the stability of the states and the regions around it. Now, we've already seen a mass exodus over the last few years of people from the Middle East and Africa to Europe. So what happens, destabilizing factors tend to be mass migrations, destabilizing locally because they're losing their population, destabilizing for the surrounding nation states, and then ultimate destinations. So we tend to see these things dealing from failed nation states and from environmental impacts. So those are the two parts that you see a lot of that destabilization, caused by. So TCOs are probably one of the primary contributions to failed nation states.
Wow. Sorry, I'm just processing that. That's pretty. That's pretty stunning. Well, how do you see the current? You mentioned COVID-19 in your blurb about the talk. So tell us about that. What impact do you see? And do you see the migration, destabilization, interacting? How do you see them interacting?
Well, I think we've had a fair amount of destabilization from COVID-19 already. Mm-hmm. Hopefully, we're not going to have a lot more. I think so long as Europe remains on shutdown, I think we limit the amount of destabilization that we have. If we ever get to a situation where COVID becomes prevalent in one country, or a disease becomes prevalent in one or several countries or a region, of course, you're going to see mass migration out of that as people try and escape. I think we have a long way to go. Now what's called the sort of the stretch time that we have with COVID, the world has. We're going to address it for the course of the next 6, 8, 9 months, year. And so maybe we get lucky and we cut it down a bit, but it'll be in our psyche for some time to go. And in fact, I can tell you that the United States is taking a lot of measures. A lot of lessons learned from this. The bureaucracy is really tightening up things like supply lines, supply chains, biosecurity measures, stuff like that. Because if something as simple as this can lead to really the economic destruction in some senses of the U.S., or certainly a downtime in productivity and the economy, then it could have been much, much worse. So I think the worst parts are probably over, but it's going to be a little longer before we recover fully.
You think the worst parts are over?
I think as far as the spikes, I think we're going to have more, but I think it's over a period of time. And I think people's attitudes already. If you just talk about attitude, people's approach and attitudes already are, okay, I got this. I'll do the mask maybe. But they're already getting out, back into society, and that's, it's more attitude than anything else.
Right.
So, I think we'll be on a sustained path of pain for the course of the next 6, 8 months. But I'm hoping on the technology. I'm betting on the technology. In this case, a vaccine.
Well, yeah, I do too. So, but whenever we've seen people getting back together, we're starting to see spikes again. We're seeing, schools are closing back down. There are businesses that are having to close back down. So, and we don't really have the vaccine schedule plan. We don't really know enough about it. We had a little talk about this before we went on air, but I think I'm a little pessimistic, even though I wish I could be optimistic. I'm a little pessimistic about a live Dragoncon next year, but boy, I sure hope we can. I really would love to be able to talk to you in person about all this, and I hope you get to say I told you so. But do you have any good news? Because all of this has just been far too depressing so far.
Yeah, I know, and it's people don't like talking to me for that reason.
Oh.
No, I don't know. It's just as if we're not learning. And you could look at the political situation in the United States, and I don't care what side you're on or how many sides there actually are, but reason and discussion and facts do not reign anywhere. And that is the scariest thing of all. If we make any changes in the United States anyway, it has to be to our educational institutions, because we can't keep raising generations like this that are that don't have the ability to critically think. The message really needs to come out. If the United States needs to get back to a real educational system based on critical thinking and analysis. Because, you look at, if you've ever looked at TikTok, I mean, has anyone actually been on TikTok? Holy mackerel, it's functional morons. I mean, twerking, I got it. But an ex-prostitute who shakes her butt with 70 million followers. Someone explain this to me.
Capitalism, baby, capitalism.
Yeah, I get it from her point of view. I'm right behind her for her point of view. She's making.
Well, she's twerking, so you better be right behind her. That's where the show is, man.
But do we not have anything better to do with our time?
Well, I mean, I guess that sort of depends on what you mean by better. I mean, benefiting society, I don't know. She's pumping money into the economy, so maybe it is worth doing. But I mean, certainly somebody is willing to pay for it. But
yeah, I'm thinking of benefiting yourself as a person.
Well, maybe.
Yeah,
so what is your good news, though? That maybe we misunderstood the good news. Do you have any?
Well, I do actually see, from my little perch in the world, I actually see a lot of response to current circumstances. I don't think people have figured out really good responses yet, but there's a lot of energy going into trying to respond, trying to get things in a more stable fashion. So that's the good news, if any, is that that people are not, whether it's companies or now saying, what the heck, we got clobbered with this COVID-19. We should have thought this through earlier on and had a better way forward. People are being a lot more self-reflective and a lot more putting a lot more brain power towards thinking ways through for the future. And planning is a great function of that. So I see that through multiple ranks in the U.S. government, out through corporate America, and I think individuals as well. Individual households, families. Well, okay, maybe I should be a little better prepared for the next time. So good news is that we do learn from our mistakes. Bad news is we do it very slowly.
So I have a question. How concerned are you about the India, China, and Turkey, Greece posturing?
Turkey, Greece, it's a long-held family tradition. We do that, arguing. So, I mean, we've been at it since 1200. I even talked to my relatives about this. I'm like, yeah, really? So I'm not horrifically worried about that. They are two NATO partners at the end of the day, and I think the other countries in NATO will exercise a little pressure on them to sort of get into line. India and China hopefully won't expand, but if you notice, there's a lot of issues with China aggressively pushing out against other nations. They're in the midst of crisis internally. Politically, Xi Jinping is sort of being challenged in some ways by other CCP members, factions. So the result has been to push out against external enemies. So that India, China could wind up to be another constrained border conflict, which is, China's way of taking attention off domestic issues. So, yeah, it's, the next 10 years with China, at least 10 years, is going to be very stressful and have a lot of friction as China pushes against the international rules of order. And I'm not talking about the U.S. rules. I'm talking about those rules that were established basically by liberal democracies after World War II, as it pushes to try and change those.
So you mentioned earlier about how this communist country is making very capitalistic moves. Is that sort of causing any sort of friction within China, within hardliners versus more liberal components of the society?
No, absolutely not, because everyone's getting wealthy.
Nobody's having a problem with that.
Yeah, everyone's making money, so they're good with that.
Okay. So we got another question coming across. What advice would you give someone who's starting a business that must source things from China given the current political and economic situation? If they don't have the luxury of 3D printing.
That is difficult, no doubt. You're going to have probably very little choice, but like many U.S. businesses, as the United States is going to move towards shoring up the supply lines. So at least for the critical stuff, biomedicines and precursor chemicals and things like that, and rare earth minerals we're not reliant on China. They already started numbers of actions on that. So that is going to happen over the next 5 years. So I think you'll see countries diversifying, companies diversifying their product lines and diversifying their supply chain out of China. China's actually threatened to retaliate on this. But as of now, we are limited. So if your product is dependent on that, I would buy in bulk. I'd move as much stuff in, planning for at some point that the gravy train is going to run out. If you're in a type of business where you can actually move that to Central America, which I've recommended in the Congress, a Central American fund. Central American Development Fund, pay companies to move to Central America. We build the economies of those countries, cut down on the illegal immigration flows, and we have a supply chain closer to the United States. So right now, your only options are to buy in bulk and stock up to go over an extended period of time if your supply chain cuts out.
Okay. So developing economies economies like China that are so rapidly growing are very thirsty for resources, including like oil and such, and that's one of our problems with global warming. So to what extent do you see this affecting things like renewable resources, and do you see it affecting those?
Yeah, well, certainly. What the problem that we have, and I think China's putting some effort towards it. We are putting some effort towards it, and I'm talking about renewable energies. Is that right now China's, as I said, sort of desperate in its use of energy. So they talk about how they've shut down 20-something coal plants this past year. What they didn't mention is that they literally shipped those coal plants to Africa, where they're active now. So they're putting in more modern systems, but they're selling the old systems, so there's really no change in the impact on the environment. So there are these issues. It's got to be cost effective, and things like solar power. If you take a look at the first solar cell, which was developed in the mid 1800s, and had less than 1%, we reached, which was by a French scientist, Germany in the early 1900s, we reached 1% efficiency. We're now at about an efficiency rate of 25, 6, 7% commercially, and 36 or so percent in the lab, right? It's the difference between moving that to where it's cost effective to produce it. But they are pretty messy to produce. So if you go the next couple of generations, we'll probably get to some point where it's 30 to 40 to maybe 50%, even though the theoretical limit is in the 80s. So let's say in 20 years we're at 50% efficiency. There's a tipping point, and that's the key thing to keep in mind. At some point, that tipping point will say, oh, it's much more cost efficient to do it solar or to do it wind than it is to do it fossil fuel. When we hit that tipping point, that's when you're going to see a mass movement towards that. And that just because there's money, there's more money to be made. And the same thing for things like fusion, which people are saying they're going to come out in the next 10 years or so with a factory, industry-ready fusion plant. So we're close, actually. If you take a look at this over a long period of time, we're actually close. In the next 10 to 20 years, we'll probably gain a lot of efficiencies in clean production, which, when they become economically better, they're cheaper than fossil fuels, and the shift becomes immediate. And then we'll also have this whole world of cleaning it up. Mm-hmm. There's a lot we can do in clean. I remember Air Force Research Labs. I guess I should. Yeah, this is there's just speculation. So Air Force Research Labs actually had a program to laser carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and they briefed me on it and said, "Look, the science is not impossible. Science is correct. The technology is difficult, but not impossible. We could do it." So there are also these extraordinary technologies that allow us to clean up the mess we've made. And I think over the next 5-10 years, those will start coming into being as well, hopefully.
So I get to have a Mr. Fusion on my car.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
The flux capacitor.
The flux capacitor. That's exciting. So what about nanotechnology and biotechnology? How do you see those playing in?
So we see examples of nanotechnology like literally every day, right? Mm-hmm. The bacterial scrubs on your hands, right, were all developed by nanotechnologies. And so there is something in the order of 1,400 different technologies that are copyrighted every week. So which is an extraordinary amount.
Wow.
So yeah, it's really something. So everything from the level of industrialization, where we see nanotechnologies being used in manufacturing, being used in developing products, rubbers with different types of coatings, to rocket fuel, where we see nanotechnologies being used in rocket fuels to make them far more excitable and burn more efficiently. And in some cases, you're looking at 20% greater efficiency in energetic rocket fuels, as they call them, which has applications in fueling cars and everything else. So when you're talking about those type of extraordinary growths and changes, if your car was 20% more efficient, or your planes were 20% more efficient, just simply because of the nanotechnology introduced into the fuel systems, I mean, that's a huge, huge change for society, for everything from the environment to the costing, to the business model for those industries. So I think that continues, that continues, unendingly. And in the next 10 years, it's just people don't know about it, right? But they just say, hey, this great new product is on the shelf. But more and more of those will be introduced, and particularly in medicine too. When you start to have nanotechnologies introduced that target specific types of cells and target cancer. So, over the next decades, hopefully that we've moved away from chemotherapy and actually moved into targeting specific cells for destruction using nanotechnologies. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's a negative to it. As an Intel guy by background, I'll tell you, you can use those same technologies to target specific types of genes and specific types of cells in people and go after a specific part of a population if you want. So, which you can. So that leads into the biotechnologies discussion on again, the positives and negatives of that. The positives that can be used in medicine, to the negatives as the weaponization of those types of technologies.
So you mentioned your history in the intelligence community. So what would be the biggest misconception that you would like to clarify amongst folks about the intelligence community, about your prior life?
I
know we got pretty deep in there, but we only have about 12 minutes left. If that.
That's a pretty tough one. I think any job is a little different when you're doing it than when you're dreaming about doing it. So I want to do this, and and sometimes it's really cool, but while it's happening, you just want to say, I just want to be home. It's just home chilling with a beer or something like that. So I sort of think that doing it, although it might live up to a lot of expectations, is very different from from actually doing it, thinking about what you're going to do and going in and training and stuff like that. And when you actually go to do that sort of work, and let's say you're an analyst and you write a piece that the president reads, and it actually changes U.S. policy. So extraordinary, but the minute it's done, and okay. Well, what do I do with the rest of my life? So it's sort of, I think when you're doing it, it's just normal work for you.
Yeah.
I only in the balance. I moved to Penn State, retired 3 years ago, and in fact, I still am on several government commissions and Defense Science Board and things like that. And looking at the difference in worlds is really, really interesting. Everyone just worries about what's in their own little world.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true whether you're in intelligence or it's true whether you're at a university. Everything's the most important thing. So I think in that sense, people are the same and work is sometimes the same. Although the one thing about the intel community is you do get to do a lot of extraordinarily impactful things.
Okay. Is there something that you know now that you wish you had known then?
I think I wish I was a different person. I don't know how to say this, but I think if I was personally probably less aggressive, less competitive, a little more, working within the system, I probably wouldn't have knocked so many heads as I went through a career. And that's just, it's something that I guess you get softer in your old age and you start to say, oh God, I really need to fire that person or something. They had a family or transfer them to Bujumbura or something like that, But so I think you could be. I mean, I was very analytical in my life, so I made decisions, and I rarely ever thought. My kids actually just told me about how I don't empathize enough with people.
Oh.
We came up. They came up at the dinner table, and they all laughed. You're empathetic, and I mean the whole table laughed, and I said, certainly I'm empathetic. So,
shut up! I'm empathetic.
So I think I would have been more empathetic.
Oh, goodness.
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I sort of like the way I did it.
That's right. Okay. Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Nick. Can I give you a couple minutes for a shameless plug? You got any books or anything?
Actually, that's funny you should ask. For those who have any interest in Chinese espionage, I just, like 2 days ago, a day ago, published the first in a series of monographs on the subject. So, and it's on Amazon and I guess Smashwords and a bunch of other places. And it's probably the most in-depth work you will see in unclassified. It's only about 50 pages, the first monograph, but it's the most detailed expose or analysis of China's espionage operations and tactics that has ever been seen in the unclassified world. So just out within the last 24 hours.
Okay, well, so anyone interested in Chinese espionage should definitely pick that up. Thank you so much for joining us, Nick. We always enjoy seeing you. Hopefully it'll be in person next year. I'm not optimistic, but I certainly am hopeful.
I'm willing it to be so, but I'm empathetic to your feelings if it doesn't happen.
That's good to know. Oh, thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and thank you very much to Calico Cove for allowing us to shoot at the studios. I'm Dr. Angie. We'll see you later.
As fun as all this streaming content is, we sincerely cannot wait to see you all in person again next year. Remember to stay healthy and safe until then. Wear a mask when interacting with other people out in the real world. Want more Skeptrack? Get more than 10 years of Skeptics Track programming at our video archive, video.skeptrack.org.